We are now recording and everyone from the lobby has been admitted into the meeting.
Thank you. Welcome to the public meeting of Northern Beaches Local Planning Panel. My name is Annalise Tour and I'm the panel chair today. The other panel members today are Glenys James and Brian Kirk, expert members. I'll just interrupt and actually ask everyone to go onto mute, please. Thank you. And the community representative is Peter Cotton. Before we begin the meeting, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. The panel has adopted public meeting guidelines which are published on Council's website. The panel has been briefed on each item by Council staff prior to the meeting and undertaken site inspections either independently or electronically. Today we have people registered to address the panel at the public meeting. The order of speakers for each item will be firstly objectors, followed by those supporting the application, including the applicant or their representative. Unless previously arranged, a registered speaker will have 3 minutes to speak, whereupon a bell will ring. Any extension may be granted at my discretion as chair. The panel has been provided with copies of all submissions received in response to the public exhibition of the application and forwarded a copy of all late correspondence. Therefore, there is no need for speakers to repeat points in details that you have made in your written submissions. Speakers should use respectful language. Defamatory or rude language will not be tolerated. At the end of an oral submission, panel members may ask questions of each speaker to clarify our understanding of what has been said. Public meetings are video and audio recorded. The recordings will be published on Council's website after the meeting. Once all speakers have finished, I will close the public meeting and the panel will move into closed session to deliberate and determine the items on today's agenda. The panel determinations and reasons will be published on Council's website, normally within 2 working days. The panel is bound by the Code of Conduct for Local Planning Panel members, approved by the Minister for Planning, and as required by the Code, panel members must sign a declaration disclosing whether they have a conflict of interest in relation to any matter on the agenda for today's meeting. After the meeting, the declarations will be published on Council's website. I have declared a conflict of interest in relation to item 4.1, the DA 413 Aluka Road, Palm Beach. So I will excuse myself from the meeting while this matter is being discussed, and Brian Kirk will chair the meeting for that item. No other conflicts of interest have been declared by any other panel members in relation to any of the items on today's agenda. In relation to item 2, the minutes of the previous panel meeting, the panel notes that these meetings have been adopted by the chair of that meeting and have been posted on Council's website. So in relation to the first item on the agenda, as I said, I've declared an interest, so I will step out of the meeting and Brian will take over.
Thank you, Annalise. Annalise is now gone. Heidi?
Yes, Annalise has left.
Good, thank you. So item 4.1, 13 Iluka Road, Palm Beach, which is a review of determination applications of a previous development application for demolition works and construction of a dwelling house, including a swimming pool.
The parrot days.
Oh,
when Julie used to come in with the parrot.
Can we have everyone on mute, please? If you're not addressing the panel. I've two registered speakers. I've Mr. Nicholas Allen, who I can see is online, to speak in objection to the application. And on behalf of the applicant, I have Mr. Walter Barder, architect on behalf of the applicant. And Heidi, do we have Mr. Barder online? Has he joined the meeting? Yep, okay, I see nodding there, so that's great. So Mr. Allen, if you could address the panel, you have approximately 3 minutes. If you can keep it to the to the particular matters that you'd like to raise. We've got copies of all the written submissions that have been made in relation to the application, and whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and appreciate the opportunity to address the council. Yeah, my name's Nicholas Allen. I'm the owner of 5 Woolrack Road, which has an adjoining boundary, and I feel that the development as it stands at the moment will impact my solar and overshadowing area. I know this has been raised before, and I try not to repeat myself. You know, the council's rejected this application twice already, overbuilding applications. You know, the process of the attribution of multiple applications just seems to wear the neighbours down. All I'm asking council to do is ensure that there's no further building over boundaries that wouldn't be approved in the normal circumstances. Other than that, you know, I hope the applicant builds their dream home and we all get on with our lives. But you know, my preference is for the council to ensure that my solar access and overshadowing is minimised and not going through multiple DAs with ridiculous things to start with and then narrowing it down and then okay, they get a couple that slip through. And other than that, you know, it's a great area. You know, I wish the applicants well, and you know, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Just for clarity, your property shares a common corner, is that right? With this property, your property lies to the southeast, is that right?
Yeah, I'm not sure about southeast, but I do have a corner boundary, which impacts my afternoon sun into my main, what is technically a dining area or an outdoor dining area. You're on mute, Brian.
Oh, at the rear of your house.
At the rear, at the rear of my house. That's correct.
Thanks for that. I'll just see if any of the other panel members have any questions for you. Glenys?
No, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Peter?
No, none from me.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Allen. We'll now hear from Mr. Barter, who's the architect on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Barter, did you want to make any presentation to the panel? Would you like to address the concerns of Mr. Allen, or is it a case of being available for questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the panel for reviewing this determination today and having the opportunity to speak to you. I do note that it's been a bumpy road to get to this point, but we feel as though we have actually addressed very succinctly the issues that have been raised in previous iterations of this proposal. I feel that Mr. Davies has prepared a very thorough and carefully considered report. I think it addresses the issues very, very clearly, and I believe that the concerns of Mr. Allen have been considered in that the proposal does not cause undue overshadow to his property. The setbacks have been increased, the pool has been relocated, the tree in the road reserve has been preserved. A number of amendments have been made to directly address the critical issues that were identified as being problematic. We believe that the building is well under the acceptable height limit. It is a building of recessive nature in its materiality. It is highly articulated, modulated. There is a significant amount of landscaping associated with the proposal. And given the wide street reserve, I think it will be a building that will enhance the locality. So I would ask that the panel be considerate of the efforts that have been made to date and endorse the recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barter. I have just one question of you. On the submitted plans, it's showing the rooftop PV cells as being flat. Is that how they'll be, or will they be inclined?
No, they will be flat.
So how, is that a case of after a bit of education here, is that a case of modern technology now catching up with architectural design so that even laying flat, they maintain their efficiency?
They may not be running at 100% efficiency, but given the aspect and the area of roof available, they will still certainly provide an element of contribution to the overall energy consumption.
Good, thank you. I haven't got any other questions. I'll just see if the panel does. Phil, Glenys, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Peter?
No, I don't either, thanks.
Well, thank you to both of you, Mr. Allen and Mr. Barter. The panel will consider the application after the public meeting, and the decision of the panel will be published on the council's website, usually before the end of this week, and most probably within 48 hours. Right. Thank you. So now we'll move to item 4.2, and for that, Heidi, if you could ask Annalise to rejoin the meeting and take the position as chair, thanks.
I will contact Annalise now. One moment.
Thank you.
Should I leave the meeting now, Nicholas Allen?
Mr. Allen, feel free to stay. We won't be discussing this matter any further until the panel moves into closed deliberations, which is not a public part of the meeting. But if you've got any interest in any other matters on the next matter on the agenda, we only have 2 public matters today. Feel free to stay if you like. Otherwise, 13 Iluka Road, in terms of the public component, is finished.
Thank you.
We have Annalise back in the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is 137 Riverview Road, Avalon. And we have one registered speaker, Rebecca England, in behalf of the applicant. So if you're there.
Thank you, panel. I am here today on behalf of Bernadette and Greg O'Neill, the property owners. They engaged me on Friday of last week in response to the recommendation of refusal before you today. Their applicant, Andrew Gould from Inclined Lifts, is currently on leave and is unable to represent them in this forum. I have had no involvement to date, but I have had the opportunity to review all the documentation and correspondence in relation to this matter. I think you will have seen that there was a letter sent through to the panel yesterday, and council has since had an opportunity to respond, and that is also before the panel. I think the main issue is public access in the foreshore and what is required in terms of public access in the foreshore, and whether the applicant had been given an opportunity to respond to that issue. So this application was lodged in July 2022, and at that point in time, council did not require a clause 4.6 for inclinators in the foreshore building line. Even as late as October 2022, when the application was accepted by council, a clause 4.6 for inclinators was still not required. The need for a clause 4.6 for inclinators in the foreshore was made, my client was made aware of this requirement in January 2023 and subsequently provided a clause 4.6. But what is most important to note is that whilst council's position in relation to whether or not a clause 4.6 is needed, the requirements of the clause remain unchanged. So the requirement for public access along the foreshore remained unchanged since its implementation in 2014. Council, as I said, wrote to the applicant in January and asked for additional information. The letter identified a series of issues, one of them being the lack of a clause 4.6. But the only area of concern in relation to the clause 4.6 was that there's an existing staircase and an inclinator may not be approved when seen in conjunction with a staircase. There was no concern raised about public access through the foreshore, and the design of the inclinator in that respect remains unchanged. So to date, my client has not had an opportunity to address the concerns in the report about maintenance of public access, and is still somewhat unsure of what public access is. They did research when lodging this application. The applicant, who's from an incline lift company, had been involved in many other examples, many other approvals for inclinators in the area. And this issue of public access in relation to obstruction between the mean high water mark and the foreshore building line had not come up before. I did some research, and council's position on the matter is inconsistent. In some instances, council have simply said, well, there's no works within the public realm and therefore there's no impact to public access. So I think it's reasonable that my client mimicked other approvals in the area, put forward a design that was consistent with other designs that council had approved, and then now is in a position where it's being put up for refusal with no explanation. The assessment report says existing access is suitable. Mind you, I consider it to be quite constrained. In some points, it's limited to the thickness of the seawall itself. But if this is deemed to be acceptable, then a suitable response would simply be shifting the location of the inclinator landing to ensure that access along that part of the property is maintained. Given the circumstances of this application, given that council's position on this issue has changed during the assessment of this application, it seems to have also changed since the initial additional information letter was sent, because council has subsequently approved 3 inclinators in the foreshore area where there are also stairs provided on the site. I think it's reasonable that the matter be deferred to allow the applicant to make the necessary amendments to provide whatever means of public access is deemed to be required by council. This would mean, as I said, the provision of amended plans, but also the provision of an amended clause 4.6 to address any outstanding matters and to put forward any further sufficient environmental planning grounds to support the application. So, as I said, we request that the matter be deferred to allow the applicant to respond to the concerns raised, noting that they have not been raised previously.
Thank you. So in terms of requesting a deferral, what's the utility of doing that as opposed to coming back with an 8.2 review?
Well, I think it's just in my opinion, will be a really simple exercise. The plans can be amended, you know, in the matter of a week. A clause 4.6 can also be done, and I think that time frame is not unreasonable, noting that the previous request for information was in January. So there has been no update on the application since then. I don't think 2 weeks is unreasonable, whereas if we do have to go through an 8.2 process, we have to relodge the plans through the portal, has to be re-notified, then has to be reassessed by different people, then has to be put up to another panel. And so that's quite a long process and it's a costly process. And I don't know if that's a reasonable imposition on the applicant when it was council's position that changed mid-assessment, and it was council that didn't advise of these concerns.
So in relation to the changes that you would be making, can you be more specific about those changes?
Well, part of that comes down to what is public access and what level of public access do council require. So the assessment report says that the existing access arrangements along the foreshore are suitable for public access. So if the existing conditions are suitable, the inclinator landing would only need to be shifted 200 millimetres upslope to maintain existing access arrangements along the foreshore. A 200 millimetre shift does not warrant re-notification. It does not warrant the submission of new or additional technical documentation. And as I said, my understanding is that that would satisfy council's requirements in terms of public access, but I can't be sure because no one has communicated that.
So just in terms of you saying 200 millimetres, we found it quite hard to actually understand the plans in terms of exactly where the inclinator is located, particularly when you try and cross-reference the actual plans and the elevations of sectional elevation. As I understand, there's the boathouse. There's a sort of flat area next to the boathouse. Then there's quite a large concrete retaining wall. And when you look at the plans, it looks as if the platform extends sort of partly over that concrete retaining wall, and sort of comes out into where the flat area is with the boat shed. But we don't know if it's at ground level there or projecting out or how it's being supported, et cetera, et cetera. And there's also a retaining wall that's required that's further upslope, but there's no details about that retaining wall. There's also the boundary between the WI zone and the residential conservation zone. We're not sure exactly the location of where this fits in with that, what that boundary is, and even the permissibility of what's proposed if it is encroaching into the water zone. So there's sort of quite a few things that do need to be worked out in terms of the application, as well as the issue about, whether an inclinator forward of the foreshore line is appropriate at all, given that I understand there has been a different change in the legal interpretation of, whether a clause 4.6 is required. But there's also been, as I understand, previously most inclinators have been permitted forward of the foreshore building line, where they're on sort of like the western slopes type area where people are getting their access via boat, and that's their main form of access to the property, as opposed to your property or your client's property where there is access from the street, and therefore access to the water is more for the owner's recreational use of that. But is that your understanding of the other applications?
There's a few questions in there, so just bear with me. The first question in relation to the exact location, my review of the survey and the plans presented indicate that the landing of the inclinator extends out over the thickness of the existing seawall. And at that point, it's a question of whether it's within the C4 zone or the W1 zone. And on my review, it comes down to the thickness of the line on the plan in terms of the zoning map. Where it comes down to meet the level of the seawall, there is excavation proposed to provide a level landing, and that I believe is the concern in relation to what level that retaining wall is. Again, that isn't an onerous request, and that information can be provided quite quickly in terms of what height that retaining wall is. And the plans can be amended to show the division of the zones and to confirm that it is wholly located within the C4 zone. But that also raises confusion, noting that the assessment report doesn't land on that issue either. It says 3 times that it's prohibited because it's within the W1 zone. And then on another page, it says it's permissible as ancillary to other development that's permitted in the W1 zone. And at no time, again, did council raise concern in relation to the zoning, despite the continual request, the 2 requests for additional information.
I think that it's a concern that the panel would have, is ensuring that it is, the permissibility within the W zone.
Oh, definitely. It's the threshold issue. Like, it can't be approved if it's within the W1 zone. But also, my client has been made to produce quite significant additional information on the basis that they were working to an approval, and now there's a report before you that says the development is prohibited. And that, again, had never been put to my client. So I think, again, a slight shift to maintain public access will also address that W1 zone issue. And we would provide the amended plans to clarify that.
So from what you're saying, even if you move it out of the W1 zone,
Mhm.
the public access to go around the back of the existing boat shed above that concrete retaining wall, you'd have to set it back, I would have thought, a lot more than 200 millimetres.
The boat shed's on the other side of the property. So the inclinator's running down the northern boundary and the boat
Yeah.
shed's on the southern.
Yep.
So my understanding was that the concern, as raised by the neighbour in the submission from May, was in relation to access along the foreshore, being forward of the boat shed and then along the seawall.
I think the foreshore is considered to be forward of the foreshore building line, which is way up the slope.
So I guess, again, I feel that it would have benefited from a conversation to understand exactly that. Well, where is
Well,
it
I suppose we're having
obstructing?
the conversation now, so.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I didn't read it that way. I didn't read that the issue was restriction of access way up the foreshore. I took the issue to be immediately along the mean high water mark being the issue. Again, I look to examples of recent approvals where there is obstruction further up the site and where you can't see a way across the foreshore area, and they've still been approved because council has repeatedly said that the works are maintained wholly within private property and public access along public land is maintained. So again, there's inconsistency about what constitutes public access. And if we don't know that, if we don't know what public access is and what it entails, then how are we meant to address it or respond to the concerns?
Yeah. All right, other questions from panel members?
No, Madam
Sorry,
Chair,
yes.
thank you.
Sorry, Peter.
Just that whole question of where everything's sitting on a plan and where the public access is, where the landing is in relation to existing structures and seawalls and so forth. A montage, there's some photos that have been shown to us that I think were part of the objection. It would be handy to have a photo maybe with a montaged location of the intended landing base, just to understand exactly where it's intended to sit, because we can't work it out from the plans. It's just not possible. It's just not clear at all and seems to be conflicting what we've seen in photos. So that's the reason why we're just concerned about where it's actually landing, and suggestion about moving it up the hill was one that we discussed previously. So I think that's something we need to have a look at when we discuss this later.
So if I can just add to what Peter said, Rebecca,
Yes.
if you go to drawing, if you might want to make a note of this, 028/2, right, that's been submitted with the application revision P1. And if you go to the bottom, if you go to where the carriage position at the bottom station is, and if you blow that up to about 400% or even higher, it's that detail that isn't, well, there needs to be a detailed drawing of that bottom station, which is really what it's all about. And a good example here is there's nothing to indicate, see, that could be that carriage, that platform could be timber, or is it concrete, or is it steel? I don't know. And if you blow it up to the left of that platform, there's a box, a red box. What is that box?
Sorry, I'm just looking at the page now and I just don't seem to see a red box.
If you blow it up to, I've got it blown up to whatever it is, 1200%. And just where the numerals 250 are that are going up the page, to the right of that, there's a red box and two lines that are to the left of the red box. So there's no detail of what that is. Right? So when we're talking about detail about the location, it's also detail the construction. There needs to be a detailed drawing of that bottom platform. Right?
Yes.
Where that station is. So
I
okay.
agree. But so I guess just for my benefit, my client's benefit, again, we're focusing on the location of the bottom platform. So is it the position that it's the location of the bottom platform that's restricting public access, or is that just an aside issue of?
I think the panel needs to have further discussion about this in terms of just a greater understanding, because it's not only public access under the LEP, it's also public access in terms of the provisions of the Coastal and Resilience Set. And I think part of the principle is that maybe you can't get public access now because it's private property, but in terms of you don't want development occurring that would restrict the potential for public access in the future. And, you know, it's not just the mean high water mark and a small strip back from that. It is how you actually can ensure that you're getting public access in the longer term, you know, given that the climate is changing, blah, 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 that sort of thing. So, and the drawings to date haven't actually, and, you know, no criticism because you weren't asked to, but there's no sort of clear indication of how public access would be maintained in the longer term. You know, given that there are quite a lot of obstructions already down on the foreshore with the jetty, etc., the boat shed. But again, just my question in terms of other examples and whether it's your understanding that it's primarily the other examples are more in locations where access to the property is essentially by the water, and therefore there's a sort of need to have an inclinator to, you know, meet the reasonable needs of the development for access, as opposed to it being an extra benefit to provide access down to the foreshore, but, you know, you can do that by stairs.
So I think I gave 5 examples in my letter to the panel. All of those are along Riverview Road and, well, sorry, with the exception of one, which is Hudson Parade. So they're all mainland foreshore properties where the access is to boat sheds and waterfront facilities. They're all very close to each other. They've all got the same kind of slope and affectations and waterfront development, and they've all been approved under PLEP 2014. There was also one other example that I made reference to, which was not on Riverview Road, which is around at Church Point, that was approved by the panel last month for an inclinator within the foreshore. And again, it's a mainland property. It's not a offshore property that relies upon that as the primary mode of transport. So I would say that it's a pretty even split. And particularly when you look along Riverview Road, the majority of properties have them.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from panel? No. All right. So as I said in my opening, the public meeting part of the agenda will now be closed, and the panel will meet to deliberate on the items, and our decisions and our reasons for our decisions will be placed on the council's website, hopefully within 2 days. So thank you very much for attending, and the public meeting is closed at 12:34.